Up on Arirang News, South Korea confirms its first cases of the new coronavirus variant from the UK. The people infected recently returned from Britain just before Christmas. All flights from Britain have been suspended. South Korea decides not to raise social distancing to the highest level yet. It'll stay at the second highest tier at least until January 3rd. And in terms of shops going out of business in the pandemic, the South Korean businesses hit worst by the first round of shutdowns were those like singing rooms and screen golf. Their closure rate doubled compared to a year earlier. It's 5 o'clock p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea has confirmed its first cases of the new COVID-19 variant from the UK. These are South Koreans who recently returned from Britain. Because the strain is much more transmissible than the original, it's quite possible that the virus is spreading here already. Kim Bo-kyung reports.
It has been confirmed that 3 people who came into South Korea from the UK last week have tested positive for the new strain of COVID-19. This is the first time for South Korea to confirm cases of the new variant. Health authorities say the 3 are family members who flew in from London on December 22nd. On top of that, the authorities are closely monitoring a South Korean family. A man from the family who was in his 80s who came back from the UK on December 13th posthumously tested positive for COVID-19. The man who suffered from cardiovascular disease died from cardiac standstill while in 14 days self-quarantine. Following the confirmation, his 3 family members also tested positive for COVID-19. This prompted the South Korean government to look into whether they contracted the new variant that's spreading fast in Britain. Health authorities said samples have been collected, adding the final results are expected during the first week of January.
Analyzing the genetic sequence for the mutation through a PCR test will not take long. Quarantine authorities might even have the results already.
The new variant type, known to be highly transmittable, is spreading across Europe, Canada, Japan, and South Africa. Last week, the South Korean government toughened quarantine measures by suspending all flights from Britain until December 31st.
People who return from Europe will be tested within 3 days of entry and tested again before they are discharged from self-quarantine.
As the new variant is believed to be nearly 70% more infectious than any other strain of COVID-19, local health officials are being extra cautious. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
South Korea has reported 808 new cases of COVID-19 in the past 24 hours. That's fewer than in recent days, but the authorities say that's likely due to less testing over the holiday weekend. The health authorities said on Sunday that they would not be raising the level of social distancing to the highest tier, level 3, at least for now. And as for vaccines, officials say they'll start in South Korea in February. Kim Yeon-sung reports.
South Korea will extend level 2.5 distancing measures in the capital region for another 6 days.
After evaluating the degree of risk, we've decided to maintain the current distancing measures until January 3rd. We have contained the virus from rapidly spreading, but we're not able to see a dramatic turnaround in the spike of COVID-19 patients.
South Korea is now almost 3 weeks into enforcing level 2.5 measures in the capital region, and during that time, daily coronavirus infections have nearly doubled. Although the past 20 days have not proven level 2.5 to be particularly effective, the government finds it hopeful that the measures have slowed down movement in the capital region during the past 2 weekends. The virus's reproductive rate has also slumped, with the number dropping from 1.27 to 1.07. For struggling local businesses, the government will supply funds of 3 million Korean won, or $2,700 maximum, while promising a 70% cut in taxes for landlords who reduce their rent prices. Meanwhile, the ruling party, the government, and the presidential house have announced that South Korea will start COVID-19 vaccinations for frontline healthcare workers and the elderly from next February.
Many countries will start vaccinations in the second quarter next year. We'll also start vaccinating the general population around that period.
They have emphasized that they are able to procure vaccines to cover 120% of South Korea's population. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
The kinds of businesses hit hardest by the pandemic in South Korea have been those that put people in close quarters, like singing rooms and screen golf. The rate at which these businesses closed doubled compared to a year earlier in the second quarter. But pharmacies, convenience stores, and opticians did relatively well. Kim Jae-hee reports.
Singing rooms, screen golf, and DVD rooms were affected the most by the COVID-19 pandemic in the second quarter of this year. According to a recent report released by the Korea Development Institute, 784 singing rooms, screen golf, and DVD rooms closed in the April to June period this year. That's 309 more than in the same period last year. The closure rate is up 0.72 percentage points on year, which is the steepest rise out of all industries. The second worst hit businesses were entertainment bars. The closing rate for the second quarter was up 0.51 percentage points from a year earlier. As for the travel industry, 79 more businesses closed in the second quarter compared to the same quarter last year, up 0.1 percentage points on year. Meanwhile, pharmacies, convenience stores, and opticians actually did well in the second quarter. Fewer pharmacies closed in the second quarter this year compared to last year, as people who were reluctant to go to hospitals visited pharmacies instead and bought more masks and hand sanitizer. The KDI says the government's disaster relief funds only had an impact on some industries.
The effect of the emergency disaster relief funds was significant in the semi-durable goods sector and small in the service sector. This is because even with the relief funds, consumers still refrain from spending at places that require face-to-face contact and have a high risk of infection.
The report also showed while the government's relief funds distributed in May did contribute to a rise in consumption, the effect faded away in about a month. Kim Jae-hee, Arirang News.
South Korea's online market for food, including both groceries and restaurant delivery, has seen explosive growth in the pandemic. According to Statistics Korea, online food sales from January to October this year amounted to $31.4 billion US. That's an increase from a year earlier of 60.3%. Sales are expected to surpass $36 billion by the end of the year. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news as we start the week. And for that, I'm joined on the line by Dr. Yang Jun-seok, professor of economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Yang, hope you had a nice holiday. Good to have you back.
Happy to be here.
Well, last Thursday, Christmas Eve, stocks in New York ended the session higher on the Brexit deal and a pending COVID relief bill in the U.S. What's the story in the global stocks and your outlook in the days to come?
Okay, well, when the market ended on Thursday, the investors were relatively optimistic. And when the market starts again today, they'll probably be optimistic as well. But they missed out on a lot of pessimism and a roller coaster ride during the weekend because, well, President Trump refused to sign the stimulus bill for a few days. Now, this would have resulted not only in a lot of unemployed people not getting enough unemployment benefits, and also the American households not getting $600 per household per individual. But also, the part of that budget bill had to do with government funding, so there was a danger that government would have gone into a shutdown as well, and the market, at least a lot of people over the weekend were very concerned about that, but luckily, this morning, Korea time, President Trump did sign the bill. So in a sense, all this worry was much ado about nothing. But still, had the market been operating during the weekend, we would have seen a great big roller coaster ride. But right now, because everything has been settled, the futures market has jumped, and we are likely to see a very strong rebound in the U.S. market when the market opens in a few hours. Now, for European markets, they were off on Thursday and Friday due to the Christmas holidays. Before they ended the trading on Wednesday, most European markets showed an upward trend, except for France, which had a slight downward trend. But they are having a lot of optimistic news as well. There was a last-minute agreement on trade between European Union and United Kingdom, so technically there will not be a no-deal Brexit. They did work out a deal on fishing rights and on standards for UK exports into EU. The EU reserved the right to put tariffs on imports from UK goods if UK violates EU standards. But there are some indications that the negotiations really went down to the wire, and some parts of the agreement seem to be put together very, very quickly. One observer pointed out that when you look at a section on encryption in the Brexit deal, it refers to Netscape 4, which went out of usage more than 15 years ago. Then the Asian markets, all Asian markets started out up due to the U.S. stimulus bill, but they ended up in very different places. Nikkei went up by 0.74%, even though they're having some problems with the coronavirus. Shanghai fell flat, and that seems to be because the Chinese government seems to be cracking down on Alibaba for monopolistic practices. And Hang Seng had a strong start, but since this morning, it is on a net decline, at least so far. They haven't finished trading yet.
Professor, in Korea, the Kospi was up today, but just barely so, and that did bring it to a new high, all-time high. The gains were paired in the afternoon as retail investors took profits, though. The Kosdaq was down a bit. What's happening today in the local markets?
Okay, well, as you mentioned, it did hit an historical high. The interesting thing about the Korean market since November 23rd is that almost every day that when Kospi rose, it did not rise every day, but when it rose, it hit an historical high, except for December 23rd. But it did return to historical highs on December 24th, and today it went up as high as 28,106.86, but it fell to 28.08. 0.60, which is still a historical high. The reason for that seems to be that today is the day for calculating dividends. So stock prices are expected to fall tomorrow as companies will hold less cash because they paid out in dividends. And also today is effectively the last day to sell stocks if the owner does not want to be classified as a major stockholder and be charged higher transaction taxes under new laws and regulations. So individuals sold, but institutions and foreigners bought, which accounted for a very heavy trading today, relatively speaking, and a very slight rise in prices. Kosdaq also started out strong, but fell for most of the day, and it ended today at 927.00.
All right, Professor, we're almost out of time, but it's the last week of 2020. We'll have data coming out on a few things this week, including the BOK's last report on consumer sentiment. What's on your radar the next few days?
Okay, well, even statisticians take a holiday, so there's not that many statistics coming out this week. Consumer sentiments, business sentiments, and then the December and 2020 consumer price indices and inflation figures are due out this year, this week. And then the U.S. consumer confidence figures and U.S. oil reserve figures are some relevant international numbers. But problem is these numbers reflect positions about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And because of the coronavirus, it's questionable how much of useful these numbers will be because, well, things are just moving too quickly.
Indeed. Professor, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
For South Korean retail investors, the most popular stock this year has been Samsung Electronics. As of Christmas Eve, according to the Korea Exchange, they've bought Samsung shares, common and preferred, worth around $13.3 billion US. And year to date, as of the 24th, Samsung shares were up 46.7%. The second most bought stock was Hyundai Motor, followed by online portal giants Naver and Kakao. The city of Seoul has selected 24 more sites to add to its list of Seoul's future heritage, a designation for modern places in the city to be preserved for future generations. New to the list is Gummaru at Seoul Children's Grand Park. Gummaru used to be a clubhouse and was going to be demolished in 2011, but it was renovated to suit its surroundings in the park. Left behind is an iconic structure for children. Also new to the list is Hongneung Arboretum, which, as Korea's first arboretum, is a part of its living history and a nice place for a stroll. And in the neighborhood of near Hongik University is Homi Art Shop, a famous place for Korean artists, especially those who attended Hongik. There are now 488 places on the list of future heritage. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.
COVID-19 has permeated our daily environment. In some cases,